No, sorry. Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Robert Castillo, along with my co-host and friend Hassan Barnes, welcoming you to another edition of Money, Power, and Politics. More importantly, enough is enough. Today, we're going to be talking about mostly local issues because Hassan has made me pledge not to bring up Trump's name, and I'm going to attempt to keep my word. But I got to tell you, he's like Pac-Man. It's everywhere. So it's almost impossible to talk about anything relevant or that people are concerned about that he hasn't placed his tongue on. Let me put that. But today we're going to start with, what do you want to talk about?
We're doing local government, so let's talk about the Baltimore City Youth Fund. So Baltimore City, like many municipalities, provide services or jobs for kids in summertime. When I was a kid, I worked many summer jobs through Baltimore City Youth Funds. My first real job was, I think I worked and was called free lunch. We handed out lunch in school for kids during the summertime. People know the schools provide lunch and breakfast for many people who are poor during the summer. Those poor kids go to school. So most places around the city provide locations where you can actually get lunch and breakfast. And I was one of the kids that worked there and handed food out. But that was my first real job. That was my first real paycheck. It was my first chance to buy my own stuff. So I love youth work. Recently, I think in 2016, there was a legislation to build and have a fund and also a nonprofit. So I think it's Baltimore City Youth Fund Incorporated is a nonprofit that stewards and manages funds for youth works and for summer jobs. And they give those funds to nonprofits and agencies to facilitate employment. I think they have about $16 million budget. Recently, Mayor Scott has determined to decide to pull some money back and to funnel some funds from the nonprofit to the city itself. So the city agencies would have those funds. People see that as a pullback. Because if the government is already funded, I don't know that you need to actually give it more funds. What they see is him taking money away from what he says he's committed to, which are youth in Baltimore, in a way that people don't understand why, for what reason. I don't know how well or how broad youth works is now. I'm not sure how many students participate every year, how many people get work experience. There was a story recently, it may have been on one of the local stations, and there was interviewing children who had received youth work jobs that were doing different things, and how they appreciated it, how they wanted the jobs, how they needed the experience. I'm not sure taking the money back. I think it's 6.9 million to take it back, how it would affect it. But money in and money out means something. So when you're taking $6 million out of a budget of about 16 million, that's a big chunk of money coming out. And I guess we don't know for sure what that will mean going forward for youth works.
Yeah, and the reason why, for the viewers who may not see why the use of public dollars, even to dedicate it for a nonprofit, may be of relevance in the show called Money, Power, and Politics, is because these programs, whatever they are operated by people and these people have jobs, and these people are paid money to perform services. And so the issue is not just whether the city or the ultimate beneficiaries are receiving the services. The issue is who got the job, what salary are they making, and so forth. So every opportunity that we see, whether that's provided by the government, the so-called public sector, or the private sector, for an individual in Baltimore, particularly an American Black person, to put themselves in a position where they can legally and lawfully obtain funds that they can use to support their families is part of our mission here, as far as we're concerned, of money, power, and politics. Now, I think this Baltimore youth program was the brainchild of former Mayor Jack.
Yeah.
And I think the idea was, Jack's idea was, as you indicate, that this money would be used to provide an opportunity for youth summer employment and so forth. I like to raise the issue relating to youth employment is, when did the transition occur? In other words, some time ago, the media started talking about youth employment as though it was intimately and inextricably related to family support.
So to that point, well, I'll say this: the fund also addresses academic support, STEM programs, mentorship, and other services beyond the summertime. So beyond the summertime.
Okay.
But that's a good point you make. And you talked about the wage going up, and we've had issues. The argument has been increased salaries, and more has been the idea that young people have to contribute. When I was, and this may have been the case for a long time. When I was a kid, if I didn't work for some job, I didn't have any. I put my own school clothes. I
Right.
put my own things.
Right.
And many of my friends had the same situation.
Right.
We were in a lower socioeconomic background, so our parents didn't have much means. They worked every day. But when they came home, it wasn't much to go around. So the idea of giving kids money, we've seen drop in crime in Baltimore City that's been impressive. Part of it is giving kids resources, whether it's physical things to do like basketball or different sports, or extra money in your pocket. The idea that when kids have money in their pocket, it limits the idea they have to go out and commit crimes and rob people for money. And get rid of the idea of having to sell drugs for money. If we're giving you jobs, you can make money on your own. The lure of the quote-unquote streets isn't as strong. So when they talk about giving money for children and for poverty, that's it, because they recognize many kids wouldn't have it but for those programs. Their parents may work. We have a lot of people in this country who work. They do a hard day's work, and they don't get paid very much money. And they haven't fixed that. So the idea is to give kids more money, so that way you can defer the costs. So that way, if they go home with no food in the house, they can help it out in the house. If they have no shoes on their feet, they can help and buy their own shoes and clothes. It's another social program to prevent poverty from leading to crime.
Well, I think it's also a way of distracting from the fact that that this system, this economic system, isn't providing adequate wages and income to their parents.
Yeah.
I mean, I work for 60 cents an hour. I'm not advocating that, but
no, for our viewers, Bob worked. That was many years ago.
It
was a different world back then.
It was back when gasoline was 25 cents a gallon. You could go to a movie for 20 cents.
And none of our viewers know that time. They can even imagine.
but notwithstanding the level of lack of income, and I won't call it poverty because we didn't think life was what it was. But my grandparents who raised us never came to me and asked me for money to help pay the gas. She never came to me and said, "Give me part of your money to help buy food." The obligation of supporting the family was always an adult obligation. Somewhere along the line, it changed in modern society where we begin to focus upon this thing called youth employment. And quite frankly, I think that follows the pattern. Whenever the government steps in to provide assistance, that if they provide it at all, it's always at the level where it can't change the system that made the assistance necessary. It's never at the level where people can use it to change the system themselves. It's never provided at the point where people can use it to create self-determination and so forth. It's never to teach them how to fish. It's always to give them a piece of the fillet, if most.
Well, I think you're right. Right in terms of when I was a kid, I didn't give my parents any money. I had money for myself. Okay, go buy school. You got money now? You want snacks? Go buy yourself. Look at that one. You got money now. It was a way, and my friends, the same thing. We all worked, and we all got jobs at McDonald's and Wendy's and those kind of places. But the same thing. It reduced the cost and the expense parents had in my situation to provide for their children. Right? They no longer had to buy me clothes and pay for things I pay for myself. But I think you're hitting on a bigger point. If you have a situation where you have family, you have children who can't afford to buy the basic things, can't buy clothes and underwear, you don't make any money.
Yeah.
You don't make the money, and the money that you're and taking care of your family. Quite often in those situations, you're living in environments where it could be reduced housing, it could be lower income areas. You have lower income places, they have reduced housing, and you still can't afford to buy your children basic needs. That's an indictment as to we need to have a different conversation about income and income inequality that we're not having. And no one have that. It's easy to give a kid a couple $100 a month to make them happy. It's different than giving family enough money to take care of the family in a reasonable way. And jobs, and because the reality is, jobs are profit. The government don't actually pay, but corporations do. When we raise minimum wage and we do different things, we're telling the employers they must pay a basic and a more reasonable wage. We have been slow to pick up on the idea that inflation is horrible, and even though we have a high minimum wage, it may not be enough for most families.
Yeah, and speaking of kids, I see in today's news that the Maryland Department of the Environment has invalidated, looks like 1,400 lead paint inspections where the inspector had apparently approved the property as either lead-free or lead-safe. And of course, the relevance of that is Baltimore City, as most of older urban areas, has been plagued with lead paint poisoning among children, because lead paint until around, I think, 1968 or so, was used in the interior paint of most dwellings. It was added presumably at the time because it was longer lasting, required not as much maintenance. But when 1,400 houses had been certified to be lead-free or lead-safe, who knows how many children are touched by that? Because, you know, children, particularly in the early age, fall around from anything they can touch, and which is how most of these lead paint cases arise. What about how should Baltimore City, how should the government respond to those inspections that relate to properties located within Baltimore City?
Listen, I hadn't heard about that. In Baltimore City, legally, a landlord can't rent a property to a tenant without it being either lead-free or lead-safe. So they have to have an outside company come in and do an evaluation, inspection, and test for lead. And they do the air samples, they do dust samples out of the homes. If we're saying 1,400, that means we have landlords who are renting properties out, either unbeknownst to them, that they have no idea it's lead in there, or they know and they just got a way to get around it. Either way, you have two things. We have in abundance of landlords who are renting property impermissibly, where they have unsafe conditions, and we have young people. And lead paint is only Baltimore. Any place, even Baltimore County, Howard County, Montgomery County, all the housing stock, like you said, had lead. So what happens is lead paint, the lead seeps through the paint. So if you have one layer of lead paint and you paint over it, the lead comes from the first layer to the second layer. Paint over again, it goes to the third layer. It seeps out through the paint. So no matter how many layers you have on the top of it, it keeps seeping out. So they have ways to remediate it. They take down framing out of the homes. You may see homes in urban areas with no window sills because they took the window sills out because they have lead paint. You may see homes where there's no borders when you go to rooms. It's an open flat door because they got rid of the framing for the purpose of making sure it's less safe. The hard thing is now that we know that there's an abundance of homes in urban areas like Baltimore City that in fact are not less safe and not less free, what are we going to do about it? And I don't think much we can do about it. The kids are unfortunately victims of the situation. Need new housing stocks and new homes, but that's not coming anytime soon. And I'm not sure what legal right parents have against landlords if they thought the property was less safe and they would give a certificate saying it was less safe and it not being less safe. So we have a situation where the government got to do something. What it can do, I have no idea. It may be a commission, it may be some kind of testing. I don't know, but this is the problem.
Well, since we're talking about youth again, I see it from the Baltimore Sun that a headline that says 2 years after cannabis legalization in Maryland, teachers see an impact on kids. They're saying, according to this article, teachers are seeing more and more children getting. And the suggestion in the article is that directly results when they say legalization of marijuana, they talk about the legalization of the recreational use of marijuana. as distinguished from medicinal use, which has been legal for some time. Under recreational use, anyone of age can go into a marijuana dispensary and buy a certain quantity of the drug legally. Or obviously, anyone who's willing to risk it can still obtain it on what I call on the street, so to speak. But why, according to an article, people are not surprised. Saying teachers have a perception that more kids are getting high since recreational cannabis was legalized than before. Although, according to the data that exists, and there's very little of it apparently, the data suggests exactly the reverse, that the use of marijuana among youth has declined. In fact, nationally and in Maryland, to the extent, again, that there's data. Why this difference in perception with what appears to be reality? Why, or are the two mutually exclusive? Is it true? Is it possible that some teachers can, in fact, see more children coming to school high, while it is also true that the overall use of cannabis is going down? What do you think?
I think so. We're decriminalizing marijuana across the country, which has led to dispensaries in Maryland is no different. There's a push towards people being able to get recreational marijuana. I suspect the students at school aren't the ones going to dispensaries getting recreational marijuana. There's still a heavy illicit drug trade for marijuana and other drugs as well. We've seen a reduction in drug use, and even alcohol among young people over the years. Fewer kids from the research using alcohol and drugs than they did a generation before. I think the issue may be because when they criminalize, people are more open to using it, and they use it. The ones that use it are more open to it. When I was a kid, a lot of kids use marijuana, so it wasn't something that back then, but it was hybrid. I knew people who were smoking marijuana walking in the school building. They were badly smoking marijuana. They were walking outside in the bus stop smoking marijuana. They were selling marijuana. So like, maybe a situation where different parts of the country are experiencing it differently. So where some teachers in more urban areas are seeing more use and more openness, whereas other places they're not seeing as much. And I do think there's fewer people using marijuana and alcohol for young people, but it may be different depending on where you are. I guess the question is, are we concerned about it, right? Are we concerned about marijuana use? Certainly, we're talking about people using heroin, people using crack cocaine, people using PCP. We would have bigger issues. We don't worry about alcohol people because they use it. There's no big story about that. People aren't worried about that as much. Is it a reason for us to be concerned about the marijuana now? If it is, what's the reason?
Well, the one of the biggest complaints that I hear, people even who say they have no problem with cannabis marijuana, is the smell. One of the biggest, and I think about that, and the smell of it, of marijuana smoke can be obnoxious, and it seems like you can smell it from miles away. On the other hand, being able to smell it also gives you an opportunity to know where it's being used. So if the technology ever evolves where marijuana can be produced or processed in a way where the burning of it doesn't create that smell, that may in fact result in greater use or increased use among those who use it, but restricted somewhat because they don't want other people around to smell. And of course, marijuana is also available now recreationally in edible.
Yeah, edible.
And gummies and all these other kinds of things. And so, but nothing seems to have replaced the primary methodology which is smoking.
Well, back in the day, we all know they had those brain drugs. To our younger members, the younger viewers who are too young for this, there was commercials on where there was a frying pan with grease and they'll crack an egg in the frying pan and they'll say this is your brain drug. Basically, drugs are killing your brain and cooking your brain. They've identified marijuana as being a drug that had reduced cognition and intellectual ability in young people. Somehow that argument went away, and they decriminalized marijuana. No one talked about that. So it may be an issue if marijuana is harmful for young developing brains, we may want to limit the use of it to young people in a much more aggressive way. But if their arguments have gone away by the wayside, it may not matter. I guess the issue is, can you learn how? Right? You can't learn drunk. No one's suggesting kids go to school drunk to learn. They said you couldn't do it. Can you learn how? If the answer is no, there could be other reasons we need to further limit the use of marijuana among young people and also be more aggressive in using it in school.
Well, of course, the answer there is no universal answer. It could be no for someone and yes for someone else. That's the problem. There is no. It's just like alcohol. The standard for, if you relate it to driving your automobile, the standard for being under the influence versus being intoxicated. Some people say, no, I can take it. I can, you and I have known people who seemingly can sit around and drink a fifth or whatever, and it not affect them, and other people who have a couple of shots and you got to carry them home. So there's no uniformity, and I don't know whether it's possible, but let's sort of switch to another area that seems to be burgeoning at the moment. That is the use of AI and its effect on the requirement for energy. And I'm relating that not just to the pipeline issue that's looming in Western Maryland, but overall, and how AI, let's talk even about the question, the legal question that you and I both know a little bit about, how AI has come to play such an important role in the practice of law. How does it affect your practice?
Well, two things. The energy one is one, which I want to address, but certainly people locally are seeing higher energy bills, and maybe because data centers, and then AI. AI short for artificial intelligence, meaning intelligent and not human. We are seeing things like Anthropic, things like ChatGPT, and we're seeing the ability for technology to process information fast enough that it can get things done. In most legal software, there's some form of AI built in. But I think AI, my approximation estimation, is going to revolutionize most fields, whether it's medicine, whether it's engineering, whether it's law, because it can do what you would have a junior professional do in a fraction of time. So if I want to research for an issue, I can type in ChatGPT and say, give me all the background on First Amendment claims in Maryland. They'll produce that to me in a couple seconds. For some associates do that, maybe a couple hours worth of to go through, log in, and start reading cases, evaluating cases. They can do it in a fraction. That will hurt young lawyers because when you learn by doing, when you first start practicing, you do grunt work, you may do research sometimes for less days. Well, as you research, you learn how the law works, you learn how the courts work, you learn all the things. Chat don't gotta learn. You ask questions, produce it. So the young lawyer will have the chance to do all the work and all the research and build their intellectual memory for how to do research. It also makes it me not want to go to an associate. No. File some paperwork. I'm gonna go over here and I'm actually ask Chat. The Chat give it to me right now, much faster, much easier than you can. But what that means for people, it may bring down the cost of the lawyer, right? If you don't have to pay a lawyer for 12 hours of work, you can do Chat GPT in 30 minutes. That's a cheaper bill for people. When you bring the cost in, that means you bring the income in. So a lot of the work, what we're seeing is bigger companies, we're seeing it at the bigger companies coming down. Bigger companies going to their law firm saying, hey, I use AI and how we save this money. Like, what are you guys doing? How we save money on this? So we start seeing reduced bills at the high level and at the low level as well. Same thing for engineering. You can go to AI, they give me a spec of this based on all these requirements, and do it within a few minutes. Engineer takes a while. It takes a minute to figure the numbers out. Right. It takes a minute to figure out all the law and all the regulations. Chat don't take a while. Chat does it like that. We're going to see this across the board, and it's going to bring the value of the work middle class, I guess, white collar employees, people like lawyers and accountants and CPAs and engineers, down to a more reasonable amount. And from that, we'll see this. America has the highest paid lawyers in the world. They hire the lawyers in Europe. They have a lot higher than lawyers in Asia. They pay a lot less lawyers. They probably shouldn't pay them as much money. ChatGPT can make it more readable and more cost effective in a way that lawyers aren't really ready for. And it would decrease the amount that we make in this country substantially. So one, I think we should. I think lawyer salaries have gotten out of line on the high. So it's some times where people make $1 million a year. Should you make $1 million a year as a lawyer? I can't say that you should.
Well,
This is a lot of money to me, and the amount of work you do. So you make $1 million a year at a big firm on one end, or you're a public defender, and making 80,000 a year on the other. The amount of work they do isn't substantially. He's not doing $1 million worth of work. He's doing $80,000 worth of work in the same job. They have the same job, and you see the scene, guys. We have a camera that like me and follows me around like do things, so I keep moving around with this follow. But we have lawyers who make vastly different amount of money, and the work they do isn't so different with the amount of money. The difference makes sense.
And that's, I think we may be trying to conflate really two different things: the work that the lawyer does with what the lawyer is paid. And unfortunately, that what the lawyer does is charged as though it's work, but in many cases it's because the lawyer's influence. You're not really paying. If you hire a lawyer to prepare articles of incorporation or articles for organization using forms that you can use yourself, really, you can find online under the SDAT. I'm not sure that having a lawyer who charges $7,000 an hour versus one who charges $700 an hour is worth it when the product itself creates an entity that's no more valid for the $7,000 one than it is for the $700. However, if the company that's being formed is seeking a relationship with General Motors where the lawyer sits on the board, the $7,000 an hour lawyer sits on the board, you might expect that somehow or another that lawyer may use his influence to help his new client receive that and that's really what lawyers do. That's what I suspect the so-called high-price lawyers get paid for. It's a thin line between an influential lawyer and a hobby. In many cases, there's no real distinction at all, except one has a license awarded by the state to engage in that profession, and one is unlicensed and for the most part unregulated, except by loosely formed ethical considerations. But which raises another question that we had with our last guest on here, the Bishop Dante Hickman from Southern Baptist Church. Is it possible that we can have too much technology? I mean, he sort of, as I understood it, this Congressman Johnny Chester calling me, but he suggested sort of a law of the jungle type. If technology replaced your job, then in order for you to continue to be able to support your family, you had to retool yourself. You had to go learn new skills. Well, the problem is at age 55 or 60, even if there's somewhere out there for me to pick up these new skills, I'm not competing for those new jobs against 55 to 60-year-old people alone. I'm competing for people who are half my age. And most employers are going to pick the younger people just because they have, not with the view toward discriminated against those, but the younger person, if who's serious and committed, I can train along the way. And by the time they get to be 45, they know my company, they know my business, they know how to operate. That 45-year-old doesn't have 25 more years of work life left in most cases. So the idea that a 45 or 55-year-old person can really effectively retool themselves, compete, and get a new job at the same or higher level of wages and benefits that he had previously is, for the most part, fictitious in species. So again, I raise the question: can we have too much of a good thing? Whether it's AI or some other form of technology, can we have too much of a good thing? What's more valuable, AI or retaining the ability of individuals to have a continuous sense of humanity by their capacity to continue to be able to support their family?
So the question you asked me is progress. Should we limit progress? Every generation led technology, whether it was from the horse and buggy to the car, whether it's from I guess the car, or even before then, if it was from the kite, got rid of the need for manual labor, the steam engine that was able to transport things great distances across the country, the airplane, the cargo. We've consistently, I recall being a kid and having a computer for the first time in school and seeing what a computer does and how rudimentary it was, how basic. We've come a long way. Technology is only getting more advanced. Technology allowing communities where they have lesser means to jump faster and further. I don't see, we can't put the data back in the pocket. There will be no rejigging of a community until we don't have technology. The issue may be different jobs, what they mean, and efficiency. Technology makes things more efficient. You can walk across the country, you can drive a car, you can drive, you can fly. Each one of those are more efficient, right? So walking is not technology, it's human nature. Car is technology, so is a plane. We don't say, hey, because we can fly now and we can drive never again. No, we do both. We still drive cars and we still fly planes. We make it faster things. We have supersonic jets. We have jets to go faster and further and longer. So the nature of humans is to have more advanced. I don't think there'll ever be a time where there's no job. Because even technology, for example, they got to be programmed. They got to do things. It's incumbent upon us to make sure the citizenry are able to take advantage of it and able to use it and work in those fields. But it won't be, I can't see a time where we have less technology. We literally have probes in space looking around for what they can find. We have Elon Musk wanting to go to Mars. And we literally, maybe 10 years ago, we had a probe in space that went up deep space and waited for a comet to pass it. It saw the comet, activated, chased the comet down, attached the comet, samples up, and sent back to the Earth. We're not going back. Like at the point we can do all that, we're not going back and say, hey, we just ride around with cars and forget about technology. We want to live we're not Amish. The Amish and the Mennonites, they may do that, but most Americans, most people around the world aren't doing it.
Well, there's a saying that says information is power, which I disagree. Information in and of itself is not power, just like money in and of itself is not evil. Information is power only if it's used. Money is evil only if it's used for that purpose. The idea that unless we're able to monetize progress or invention or technology will stop, I think, the species. I think I think just because we come up with a way of automating a function, it doesn't mean that necessarily we have to use it in a way that displaces a current person if there's no place for that person to go to be able to support the family. I think that technology and humanity can coexist. I think that the idea that they don't is as a result of a thing called greed.
So you're thinking too high-minded. You're thinking too high-minded.
Well, you call it high-minded, but the reality of it is that the idea, I start from the premise that everything is God. That all of us are just are custodians, if you will, for a short period of time. Nobody takes it with you. That I do. In fact, I've never seen anybody laying in the coffin with gold rings on. They leave. So with that in mind, we are, I think, compelled to use the resources that we didn't create. We're compelled to use those resources to make sure that everybody can have at least that which they're willing to work for in a month.
That's high-minded belief. Bezos is one of the people in the world, not because he wanted to have things equal for everybody else, he wanted profit. Steve Jobs was very wealthy, not because he wanted to be democratized.
But the interesting thing is, I said to the bishop, most of the super wealthy if you ask the question, would you rather pay higher taxes or face a world of chaos because people can't earn enough money to support their families? They say, I'll pay higher taxes. But so the pressure, the unbridled desire to move up in terms of wealth accumulation isn't really coming from the super wealthy. It's from the people who want to be like them.
I'll say this: Bezos has a big workforce. He can pay more. He can pay them more.
Yeah.
He can choose to pay people a better living at Amazon. He has not. So when if he been forced to. But he can easily say, you know what, we're going to increase everybody pay by $5 an hour. He's one of the wealthy people in history. He can easily say, you know what, we got some more. He got divorced from his wife. She became the richest woman in history. And he's still one of the richest people in the world. So he can easily say, you know what, guys, we got all these employees working. I'm going to give them more money. I'm going to take $1 billion less a year in salary, give them more. They're not going to do that. The reality is people want to make as much money as possible, as much as possible for the rest of their lives. So they're not going to do it where they make things equal for everybody. They're going to do it so they do.
Well, there is an example of somebody doing exactly that. I can't remember the name of it. It's a credit card processing company in Seattle, Washington. The owner, the owner and founder of the company was paying himself about $2 million a year, and the janitor was making minimum wage. And so this happened about 10 years ago, as I recall, and I have to find the name of the company. But he decided one day, you know what, I'm going to flip the script. I'm going to lower my own salary, and I'm going to establish that no one who works for the company will make less than what's required to support the family, assuming a 40-hour work week, which meant that even the janitors made the equivalent of $70,000 a year. Now, and so people said, you're crazy. You're going to have to raise the prices of your processing fees. And he took a loss in this. He took a loss. But what happened is, after 3 years, everything turned around for the company. They got more business. They grew faster because no employees left the company. And he didn't need as much supervision because the people wouldn't let anybody come in the door. So they supervised the new people where that whole middle management level of supervision he got rid of because they were unnecessary. So the idea that giving higher than market rate wages will necessarily result in a loss of competitive capacity isn't necessarily the outcome. And I understand that, particularly because most of my clients have bid for government contracts, which are, for the most part, awarded on the basis of the lowest bid. But that's because that process continues in large part because we haven't figured out a better one, but also because the public really doesn't know how much the final cost of that work really is. Just because the contract is awarded for $1 doesn't mean the final cost is going to be $1. And so I think that if you really do the research, you'll find that more often than not, the final cost under the contract that was awarded as a result of competitive bid is higher than the next lowest competitive bid price that was offered for the work in the first place. But that kind of information isn't shared. Now, AI is being used by a former young man who used to work for me, who went into this. I just got a text, he's creating a program, a piece of software that would do just that would take that kind of data, put it into a program format because of some sort of transparency, which will be available to the public, where you can actually track those dollars all the way through. And now, how the public uses that information, whether it deems it to be reliable, who knows? But as I said, if information is only power if you use it, and it's only information to you if you act it.
So for our viewers, and we have different opinions. These are La La Land. There's nowhere in the world companies going to not take a profit. Their goal is to get a profit. But to that point, I want to go over to the issue and back to Baltimore. I think it also goes to your point about what you pay people with technology. The Bay Bridge. Okay. I know there was a collapse last year. The Key Bridge in Baltimore. There was collapse, a barge or a huge ship. It wasn't barge, but it struck the bridge and there was a collapse. The bridge has been down since, and we're getting to a point where we are ready to move around. There's been a couple of things going on. I think there's time. They're doing demolition now. It's still so. Although it happened over a year ago, demolition is starting soon, and there's been some markups and some ideas about how the bridge will go forward. There's been some questions. I know Biden, when he was president, he allocated money for funds, but we don't know whether the administration wants to maintain the bridge and maintain those funds. But in terms of finances and money and costs, that's a good example. That's an example of a company providing, not a company, companies providing services to the government, to the people, and you can guarantee them, and they're going to get a profit. So the people who are working on the bridge may make $20 an hour, but the person running the company will get much, much more money than them. This example, and we don't see government saying, "Hey, if you're going to be part of this building, we want you to take less money or pay your people for it."
Well, you know, the government funded contract, the wages are governed under a thing called the Davis-Bacon Act and construction contracts.
Yeah.
Under the Davis-Bacon Act, the wage scale is really taken from the wage scale that's set forth in the most recent collective bargaining agreements between companies and the relevant union, as published by the Department of Labor. So construction, public works is one of those areas where the hourly wages always substantially exceed so-called minimum wage, but they are, in many cases, in most cases, they do mirror the actual wages that are necessary within that locale to be able to support a family on a basis of a 40-hour-a-week job. The Davis-Bacon Act in Maryland is called the Miller Act, but the result's the same. But that only applies to construction. There's similar laws over the service area as well. But there's not many federal laws that do directly regulate or maintain that you mandate that you use a federally determined wage scale. Now, you're right. They're beginning demolition on the what's left of the old key, and under a company called Peter Kiewit, which is one of the largest contractors in the nation, is part of a joint venture that's been awarded a hybrid design build type contract. And I'm not going to bore viewers with trying to explain what that really means. Contractors out there who are listening that know what a design is. But they've started demolition. There's two kinds of demolition, really. There's underwater demolition, and there's demolition that occurs on land. And maybe there's even aerial demolition. You know, part of the bridge that fell in the water has got to be removed because it's got to make way for the new pier structure. And even if you think it might collapse, they can't afford to leave it there because underwater currents may eventually move it into where it collides with the new structure. So you can't take that risk. You've got to get it out of the water. You've got to remove what was left in the land, and you've got to remove that part of the bridge that was still suspended in the air. So it's going to take a good bit of time for that demolition process to go on. Now, construction can start before there's been total demolition on one side.
So the projection, demolition takes about 9 months to a year for demolition.
Yeah.
So this project, Congress passed, appropriation authorization for about $2 billion for the Key Bridge rebuild. Now, passing authorization have the money on the same thing. So they passed the authorization for it, and we have a contractor. I think they have some specs for the bridge. How long a process? So it's about 9 months to a year for demolition. They start demolition now, so that means they won't be done until 2026. How long a process will it be to build the bridge? What are the timelines they have now going forward?
I'm not sure, but I suspect it would take 2 to 3 years to complete construction of a new key bridge, at least that long. And you mentioned federal funding and congressionally appropriated funds. You know, it's pretty clear that if there was a way for Trump to cut off funding for the bridge, just like he's cut off funding for Maglev, he cut off funding for the new stormwater system for Ellicott City, as well as the job in Hagerstown that escapes me. If there was a way for him to freeze that money, he would do so. If during his term additional monies resulted from cost overruns or estimates that were simply too low arise and require additional congressional funding that he can get his hands on, I would try to accelerate the construction rather than have it occur.
Let me ask you this: Kiewit had the contract to do the work.
Yeah.
That's a national company. What local companies do you know of, and have any companies locally gotten contracts so that we can keep some of the money for people in the area, whether it's employees and companies?
Yes, I know of at least three American Black companies, and I say American Black versus African American for a reason that I'll explain on another show.
I didn't even mention
But
Black.
that's the ones I'm interested most in.
Okay.
That's the one I'm interested most in. But yes, there are a number of local companies that have already been engaged in the performing work, including companies that are owned by American Black. I have three clients, as I say, that have gotten contracts with Peter Kiewit or the joint venture, and I know at least one other that's under active consideration. So there's tremendous, I think, opportunity still. And if I wish I had the phone number easily accessible, but if you want to find out how to access the system by which you can make the availability of their services known to Peter Kiewit, you can try to reach me at 410-366-1500 and tell the young lady that asked to answer the phone that you're looking for information on the Kiewit project.
So I think this is important for any people out there who are contractors who want to do work on the Key Bridge and are interested. That may be a way where you can work with the prime contractor. So if you say your number again, Bob, for the audience.
This particular office, the number is 410-366-1500. You can ask for me or just tell Tammy, the young lady who answers the phone, that you're looking for information, for contact information for the Peter Kiewit Bridge project.
And it's important for us. So we here every week and we give information. We talk about local politics and money issues, but we also want to help the community. So whenever we have an opportunity to give resources, options, we do. And this is a great option for the Key Bridge project to be a huge project in the region for many years to come. And quite a few of small minority-owned businesses don't have the resources or ability to get in contact with someone who knows how to get on those jobs. Give someone here and simply use it. Call in, have a conversation. It may not work, but there may be other things you guys can work on together as well. So thank you for that, Bob.
You're very welcome. Well, as all things end, but let me. I don't want to necessarily end on a sad note, but I got to tell you, I think it was also true last Friday. I don't know whether I got into it. 50 years ago, in 1975, a law firm was born in Baltimore City called Singleton, DeShiel and Roberts. That was 50 years ago, in 1975. In 2002, Herbert L. Singleton Jr., who was the Singleton in that firm, passed away from an apparent heart attack. He was 56 years old. 1 week ago yesterday, Tony Robbins passed away, also from apparent heart attack. He was 70. There is one remaining from the Singleton, DeShiel and Robbins firm, and that's so it's now, if you ever, the two questions that all of us face in life is who's next and when. Well, in the context of Singleton, DeShiel and Robertson, for me, that question's been answered. I'm the only one left. The win is still a mystery, and hopefully it's no time soon. See you next Friday. Money, power, and fire.
Take care, guys.